Most people think the 1,000-year kingdom in Revelation 20 is God's happy ending. It isn't. It is something far more unsettling and far more important, because the millennium doesn't end in peace, it ends in rebellion, and God designed it that way. Before we get to why, look at how it begins. John sees an angel come down from heaven, carrying a chain and a key. And what this angel does next should stop every reader who has ever feared that the darkness in this world is winning. He seizes the dragon, the ancient serpent, the devil, Satan, and binds him for 1,000 years, throwing him into the abyss and sealing it shut. One angel, one chain, one command. A single angel walks down, picks up the enemy of all humanity, and locks the door. That's it. The Greek word John uses here, abyssos, isn't a generic pit. In the Septuagint, and in Jewish apocalyptic texts, like 1st Enoch, abyssos was the primordial deep, the place reserved for the definitive containment of cosmic evil. When John's first-century audience heard that word, they didn't hear temporary holding cell. They heard finality, and that matters. Because this scene isn't a battle, it's a sentencing. Satan isn't defeated here through combat. He's removed by decree. And the distinction between a battle and a sentencing changes how you read everything that follows. Because what follows is not a reward. It's not the finish line. What God establishes next, a kingdom of perfect justice, perfect peace, a throne in Jerusalem, nations governed without corruption. All of it serves a purpose most readers never see coming. It is an exhibit. And the evidence it produces will be the most uncomfortable truth the human race has ever faced. Not every Christian tradition reads those 1,000 years the same way, and the disagreement is ancient. As early as the 2nd century, Irenaeus taught a literal future kingdom based on what he said he'd received from those who had walked with John. 2 centuries later, Augustine reinterpreted the millennium as symbolic of the church age, and his reading shaped Western Christianity for over 1,000 years. This video follows the premillennial reading, a future, literal reign of Christ, because it's the framework that makes the rebellion at the end theologically devastating rather than symbolic. So what does this kingdom actually look like? The prophet Zechariah saw it centuries before John did. He wrote that on that day, the Lord's feet would stand on the Mount of Olives, the same mountain from which Jesus ascended. The mount would split in two, and the Lord would be king over the whole earth. Isaiah saw it too. He wrote that in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house would be established as the highest of the mountains, and all nations would flow to it, not to fight, to learn. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. This is not a metaphor for spiritual improvement. It is a government, a throne, a capital city, nations arriving not under threat of invasion, but drawn by the justice they've never seen from any human ruler. No corruption behind closed doors, no court that rules for the powerful and forgets the poor. For the first time in history, governance will work, and it will work because the one governing is the one who made the people he governs. But here's what most treatments of the millennium miss entirely. The point of a perfect kingdom is not the perfection itself. It's what perfection will expose. Satan is locked away. Christ is on the throne. Justice is flawless. And every human being alive during those 1,000 years will face a question that no one in history has ever faced under these conditions. A question with no remaining excuse. What does your heart do when nothing external is left to blame? The first thing that happens when the kingdom begins is something most people skip past too quickly. The dead come back. John writes that he saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony, and they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The Greek word he uses is ezeson. They lived, and this matters more than most readings let on, because John uses the exact same verb 5 verses later when he describes the rest of the dead coming to life at the end of the 1,000 years. Same word, same form. If it means physical resurrection in verse 5, and virtually every reader agrees it does, then consistency demands it means the same thing in verse 4. This isn't my metaphor. These people stood up. That's the first resurrection, and those who belong to it don't watch the kingdom from a distance. They participate in it. Daniel wrote that the kingdom would be given to the saints of the Most High. John confirms it. They are made kings and priests, reigning on the earth, not watching from the gallery, governing. There's a man somewhere listening to this who has spent 20 years serving in ways no one sees, teaching the same Sunday school class, driving the same elderly neighbor to the same appointments, praying the same prayers over the same kids who don't seem to be listening. And he has wondered, more than once, whether any of it registers. The millennium is God's answer to that question. Nothing done in faithfulness is wasted. Every unseen act carries weight that outlasts the life it was done in. But the kingdom doesn't stop at humanity. The whole creation responds. Paul wrote that the creation itself waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God, and that the creation will be set free from its bondage to corruption. Isaiah saw what that freedom looks like. The wolf will dwell with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the young goat. A little child will lead them. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The problem was never the creation. The problem was what had been done to it. The curse that touched the ground in Eden, when God told Adam the soil itself would resist him, that curse begins to lift. The earth produces without thorns. The animals no longer kill. The world runs the way it was designed to run before it was broken. And for 1,000 years, it works. Perfect justice, perfect peace, Christ on the throne, Satan sealed away, no deceiver whispering to the nations, everything the human race has ever wanted in a government, finally, flawlessly delivered. Then God opens the seal. Revelation 20 says that when the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison, and he will come out to deceive the nations at the four corners of the earth. The Greek word is planese, to lead astray, to pull off the path. It's the same word used in Revelation 12 to describe what Satan has been doing since the beginning, deceiving the whole world. For 1,000 years, the one who leads astray was removed. The path was clear, no deception, no distortion, only the truth, visible and governing. And when he returns, the nations follow him. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that John describes them as numberless as the sand of the sea. After 1,000 years of the most perfect government any human being has ever lived under, a portion of humanity looks at the dragon and says yes. That's not a failure of the kingdom. That's the whole point. Jeremiah wrote the diagnosis centuries before the millennium would confirm it. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? The millennium doesn't cure that sickness. It puts it under laboratory conditions, 1,000 years with every external variable removed, no demonic influence, no corrupt government, no systemic injustice, no scarcity, and the heart still chooses the serpent. Here is what the exhibit proves. The millennium is not God's solution, it is God's exhibit. 1,000 years with every variable perfected, and the human heart still chose the serpent. Not because the system failed, because the system was never the problem, which raises the question that the entire Bible has been building toward. If perfection cannot change the human heart, what can? God answered that question centuries before the millennium would ask it. Through the prophet Ezekiel, God made a promise that most people read too quickly. I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you. I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh, and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you. Read that again slowly. God didn't promise a better government. He didn't promise better circumstances. He promised a transplant, stone out, flesh in. And then, the part that changes everything. His spirit was placed inside the cavity where the stone used to be. Ezekiel wrote that 6 centuries before Christ. And when Jesus sat across from Nicodemus in a dark room in Jerusalem, he said nearly the same thing. Unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. Nicodemus was a Pharisee. He had the law, he had the temple, he had the system. And Jesus told him none of it was enough. The entrance requirement wasn't knowledge. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't the environment. It was a second birth, one performed by the Spirit, not by the will of the one being born. Ezekiel said it to Israel in exile. Jesus said it to a theologian in a room. The millennium will say it to every nation on the earth. The same truth, widening scale. And the Spirit is at the center of all three. Not as a concept, not as a doctrine you affirm on Sundays and forget by Tuesday, as the only force in the universe capable of reaching the part of you that a perfect world cannot touch. If you have ever sat in a room where everything was right, the worship, the sermon, the people, or changed everything on the outside, the city, the job, the habits, the relationships, and within months found the same quiet distance from God, settling back in like it never left, You have already lived a small version of the millennium. That is the exhibit running in your own life. The environment changed. The heart didn't. And if you have opened your Bible on a Wednesday morning, not because anyone was watching, not because it was Sunday, not because a sermon told you to, and asked the Spirit to show you something, and for a moment, just a moment, something shifted inside you that no discipline, and no willpower, and no perfect circumstance had ever been able to move, that is the verdict. That is what the exhibit proves. Only the Spirit reaches what perfection cannot. But the exhibit isn't over yet. The Spirit has been doing this work quietly, one heart at a time, since Pentecost. In the ordinary, in the unglamorous, in the Wednesday morning silence when no one is keeping score. You are not waiting for a perfect world to fix you. You are carrying the one thing a perfect world could never produce. A heart the Spirit is already reaching. But God has one more thing to show. Satan's rebellion is crushed without ceremony. Revelation 20 says the devil is thrown into the lake of fire, and that is the last sentence ever written about him. No speech, no final stand, just an ending. And then John sees something no prophet before him had seen in full. A new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And the new Jerusalem, descending from God, prepared, finished. Then a voice from the throne, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more." In Eden, God walked with humanity. Sin broke that. The entire Bible, every covenant, every prophet, every exile, every promise, has been the story of God closing that distance. The millennium proved what couldn't work. The new creation is what does, permanently. Isaiah wrote it 7 centuries before John saw it. Of the increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end. If someone you know has been carrying questions about what God is doing with this world, send them this video. The exhibit is closed. The verdict was always the Spirit.